Hello, I'm Dr. Leonard Matheson. I'm a neurorehabilitation psychologist. I've been helping people to get back to work or school after serious illnesses and injuries since 1970. Today's Clinical Research Consortium will provide you with background information concerning a technique that I find useful in helping people recover from brain injuries. This technique is based on more than a century of research on what we know as the Yerkes-Dodson curves, and how they can be useful to understand the consequences of concussion. As part of my educational efforts with my clients and their families, I introduce them to what I call the healthy activation performance curve. I point out that this was one of the earliest findings in neuropsychology, first identified by Robert Yerkes and John Dodson in 1908. This curve describes the relationship between performance, what the person is able to do, and brain activation or arousal. As brain activation or arousal increases, performance improves up to the mid-range, while beyond the mid-range, performance deteriorates. With the healthy brain, the normal range of brain activation or arousal results in maximum performance. This is often called the peak performance window, or being in the zone, or being in flow. Basically, our best levels of performance are found when the brain is neither underactivated nor hyper-aroused. But when a person has a traumatic brain injury, there are two problems that are foundational causes of disability. The primary effect of a concussion is to narrow the curve. There is a much more narrow range of optimum activation. It's much more difficult to maintain flow and peak performance. The secondary effect of the concussion is to lower the performance peak. Even if this is a slight peak deficit, it feels quite profound, especially if the person was used to being high functioning, used to pushing himself or herself to maintain a high standard of performance. A hard-driving person will be discouraged by this much more profoundly than a person who is more easygoing. Before I go into the specifics about how these impairments produce a broad range of disabling and discouraging functional limitations, let's take a closer look at what Yerkes and Dodson actually found. Their research actually identified two curves. There was a curve for complex tasks, like the healthy activation performance curve we've been discussing, but there was also a curve for simple tasks that produced quite a different effect. Basically, for simple tasks, brain activation or arousal continues to be positively related to performance at all levels of arousal. As brain activation or arousal increases, simple task performance continues to increase. But wait a minute. What we all learned in Psychology 101 was that the relationship between brain activation and performance was called an inverted U. Where did that come from? Well, it's really a consequence of the work that was done by Donald O. Hebb. Dr. Hebb was a very productive and sometimes controversial Canadian psychologist who coined the term inverted U. Hebb taught that activation improves performance up to the mid-range, and after that, hyperarousal deteriorates performance. It's a simple and engaging concept that all of us have experienced and everyone has heard about, for example with professional athletes. The inverted U curve helps to explain how a National Football League Hall of Fame quarterback can throw 5 interceptions because he is underactivated due to fatigue, and in the very next game throw 5 touchdown passes when he is in flow. It helps to explain how an older tennis champion can come back from serious injuries and clinical depression, enter the Australian Open as an unranked player, and win the championship. It helps to explain how a very young Major League Baseball player can lead the league in strikeouts in the same year that he's the All-Star Game's most valuable player. I like to use the examples provided by professional athletes because their patterns of success and occasional failure can't be attributed only to their physical prowess. They are amazingly fit. There's something more. There's something psychological at work here. The peak performance window is not a mystery. The healthy activation performance curve describes a state of brain activation that all of us can access, although a brain injury makes peak performance much more difficult. With a concussed peak performance curve looking like this, which rings true for all of our clients as we talk with them about how they are now compared with how they were before their concussion. This gives clients and their families a handle on what's going on when they push themselves to perform but fall short. And that's one of the values of the Healthy Activation Performance Curve. It's a heuristic model that gradually helps clients visualize what's going on in their brains so that they can begin to pull their own strings. It's not easy to understand, but it gives clients and their families a conceptual handle on what they're aiming at, what they need to get back to. Now let's come back to the basic science underlying these phenomena. As I said, it started with Yerkes and Dodson's two curves, but Dr. Hebb just focused on the curve for complex tasks. Now that we understand quite a bit more about brain function than Yerkes and Dodson and Hebb, it's important to dig deeper. And that's what several research labs around the world have been doing over the past 20 years. David Diamond, Adam Campbell, Colin Park, Joshua Hallinan, and Philip Zoldaz published a research paper in 2007 that's a great place to start. I'm going to present a brief distillation of some of their findings right now. Diamond and his colleagues studied both activation performance curves, recognizing that they address different but related phenomena. The simple curve predominates when people have highly focused attention and a narrow range of cognitive cues. The complex curve predominates to the degree that the person experiences divided attention and must use working memory. These curves faithfully represent two different aspects of the range of relationships between performance and brain activation or arousal, in which it is the match between the person and the task that defines simple versus complex. Kurt Warner and Serena Williams and Mike Trout can make impossibly complex tasks into psychologically simple tasks, allowing them to push their performance to exceedingly high levels. This is the province of ecological psychology, the area of psychology that is most closely related to rehabilitation, and the area of psychology in which occupational therapy finds its most congenial home. Now, given that brief introduction to the relationship between performance and brain activation or arousal across the span of simple tasks to complex tasks, let's go back to the Healthy Activation Performance Curve and see how we can use this as a heuristic model for our clients and their families. As I explained to my clients, the primary effect of the concussion is to narrow the curve. The low end of the concussed curve depicts poor performance as a consequence of low brain activation or arousal caused by neurometabolic inefficiency. Recall that the brain is a metabolic hog, sucking up 20% of your total body metabolism. When a concussed brain tries to keep up with previously achievable demands, it struggles mightily. The neurometabolic inefficiency of the damaged brain of a person who does not respect their limits makes it extremely vulnerable to overload and exhaustion, what I call fatigued activation. So, what do we do to help the client get back to their previously healthy activation performance curve? The first step that I take with each of my brain-injured clients is to teach them how to achieve brain restorative sleep. I define this as 5 cycles of deep, restful sleep. I encourage clients to develop this as a keystone habit, organizing their days around achieving 5 cycles of deep, restful sleep each night. Brain restorative sleep will help the client extend his or her activation performance curve at the low end, providing more cognitive and emotional resilience. But that still leaves problems at the high end because of the secondary effect of the concussion, a slight peak deficit. Even if it's only a 10% deficit at the high end, chasing 100% performance with a brain that has only 90% capacity leads to what we might call anxious activation. Anxious activation really cripples performance and is often quite discouraging to the person. If it's not handled properly by the treatment team, this discouragement can be a corrosive influence, leading to a generalized anxiety disorder and clinical depression that brings about neurochemical changes that make the whole situation much worse. What I encourage clients to do to address high-end anxious activation is to negotiate with these symptoms by pacing themselves with a series of just right challenges in combination with brain restorative sleep. A just right challenge occurs when the client takes on a meaningful task that is slightly beyond his or her current abilities. With effort and accommodations and professional guidance, the client uses the just right challenge to stimulate gradual neuroplastic change that brings the task back into what's possible to achieve. The principles of ecological psychology are important here, but that's a topic for another time. The point to be made is that quite a lot can be done to minimize the crippling experience of chasing 100% performance with a brain that has only 90% capacity. So, helping the client address low-end neurometabolic inefficiency and high-end anxious activation are crucial steps in restoring the healthy activation performance curve. It's not easy. It takes time and dedication and intentionality, but it does work. I have other lessons that address in more detail the therapeutic approaches that I've introduced here. In the meantime, here are 3 useful references that I'd like to bring to your attention. Pause the video and track these down on Google Scholar. They're readily available and will be quite helpful. I also want to point you to a resource that many of my students and colleagues have found very effective since we first started offering these back in 1980. Workshops provided by Matheson Education and Training Solutions. In particular, check out the training that my friend and colleague Tanya Percy offers on cognitive functional capacity evaluation. Tanya is very experienced and does a great job helping her students access her skills and expertise. They also have other courses available and are continuing to expand their catalog. Well, thank you for participating in the Clinical Research Consortium. Please tell your friends and colleagues about us and invite them to join. Follow us on the Matheson Development website, where we list many other very helpful resources. I'm Dr. Leonard Matheson, signing off for now. Take care.